Hello, I'm Royal Orr. Welcome to the last in our special Epiphany series, celebrating the beginning of 2025, the year in which the United Church of Canada turns 100. Well, this week we decided just to kind of focus on my fellow travelers on this journey, and that is Brian Arthur Brown and John Bedell. And really kind of maybe gather up some of the themes that have been part of what we've done over the last several weeks, but also encourage people to continue the conversations that are leading to some pretty exciting developments in terms of how United Church communities of faith are celebrating our centennial. So let me start with Brian and get right at this phenomenon of clusters. We've talked about it a few times over the last few weeks, but maybe you could give us a little bit more background. Like where did this come from? And it seems out of control at this point.
Yes, it's mushrooming. You're right. Well, the interesting thing is that when the United Church became restructured in its levels of government and so on in 2019, it had still the national office and still the congregation and halfway in between regional councils rather than conferences. And there was a suggestion that there should be clusters. Uh, Maybe replacing presbytery. Nobody thought we'd ever miss presbytery, but it turns out that presbytery uh, had fellowship, had meals together, had all kinds of things and events together, and that's gone missing. And the cluster thing never really got much off the ground, except in a few places. Uh, Everybody thought it was a good idea, and some places tried it once or twice. I don't think there were until earlier this year or till about a year ago, I don't think there were more than a dozen clusters regularly established. Well, the interesting thing is that I know about clusters because um, I have a connection across the river from Niagara Falls, where I live, with the American Baptist Church, which is, we might say, liberal progressive Baptists, we might say. And they have in the city of Niagara Falls, New York, 5 congregations. The one that I do some work with is First Baptist, and it's a white English speaking, blah, blah. And the second one is Indigenous, and there are 3 black congregations. And like Baptists, every congregation is independent. They're rather congregationalist in their government, but they cluster for everything special. Anytime any one of the congregations is doing a special program, we all go. And so they all come to the church I'm associated with for a 3-hour Good Friday service. And the other churches all come, and the other ministers all participate. We do the last words of Christ, 6 sayings from the cross, and there are 6 of us ministers, and so on. But we never have a meeting. We don't have. Some of these events have food, have whatever, and so on. So clustering can work. I know that. I described in one of my first anniversary books, The Keys to the Kingdom, the idea that we should get busy on these clusters, and a time to really experiment and try and make it happen would be in local anniversary celebrations, and so on. Well, that book had pretty good circulation, and before you know it, there were already 16 Wood Lake patron congregations organizing clusters formally in their area, mostly in Alberta and BC, but nevertheless, there were 16 of them got started before anything else got going in the early years of the circulation of that book. It was supported by the second book, The Untied Church of Canada, and I still get emails from people telling me, "Do you know the publisher misspelled your title?" Uh, the United Church of Canada, the Untied Church of Canada, and so on. But the Untied Church of Canada also supported and took the cluster idea a step further, reporting what's going on and that some are doing it, and so on. And the Untied Church of Canada had a second goal, which I'm going to describe regarding congregational endowments. We'll do that later
Mhm.
today, and so
Yeah.
on. However, so we with the help of Wood Lake staff, we had a kind of a group that was helping congregations get organized all across the country. And so on. Wood Lake authors like David Giuliano and myself and others, and so on. So we got these structures going, and it has taken off. I've been saying lately in other interviews and in other places that we now have 100 clusters. The smallest is 5, and that's in St. Anthony's northern touch of uh, Newfoundland. So there are 5 there. Uh, the largest has 25, which is in London, Ontario, and its suburbs, and so on. Uh, and so there are several others. And I think between now and the anniversary, there will be even more getting established because uh, while once upon a time in previous anniversaries, um, Presbytery Conference and General Council celebrated the anniversaries, but congregations did nothing except maybe a prayer or something on some Sunday. Congregations are very keen to do something, and many of them are doing it alone, a special service, but increasingly
Yeah.
across the country, they're having these clusters. I
Yeah,
described a few of them for
you
you.
know, Brian, I can attest to that. I participate in the so-called Joint Grants Committee between General Council and the United Church of Canada Foundation, and
Sure.
and we've been receiving applications for some of the special money we've set aside for celebrations from
Yeah,
across the country, and a whole range of really interesting things that people are doing. A lot
sure.
of them focusing on music because we are going to
Yeah,
have the opportunity of some new music available to us, but a wide range of things,
exactly.
and heartening to see not only people getting together, but a real united church kind of spirit. A focus on social justice for many of them, the environment. So it is happening. That's for sure.
You got it. That's exactly right. I'll give you some more examples. You mentioned the music. Well, the congregation, or not the congregation, the cluster in Essex County, Ontario, uh, has 80 members so far in its uh, mass choir for the cluster service, and they're hoping to make it 100. Well,
Mhm.
they're going to have to count their musicians and everybody else, but they're looking at a clustered mass choir of 100. People are saying, hey, we're seeing the United Church in strength, which we didn't know it had. Uh, these are going to be a shot in the arm
Yeah.
for
Well,
congregations.
definitely. And, fun stuff like people putting up big tents like we were back in the 1870s with tent ministries
That's
and
right. That's right.
and anticipating, hundreds, if not more than 1,000 people at some of these
Yes, that's
services.
right.
So I
Well, I
think
can
you're
give
right
you
that
another
it's going to be
example,
profile.
another good example that hopes to have maybe 1,000. Uh, it only got totally organized last week when a couple of clusters decided to amalgamate, and they're meeting at the Sandy Soto uh, Indigenous uh, Center for Lay and Clergy Training, and so on. It's near Winnipeg. There won't be any congregations from Winnipeg going there, but there will be, uh, I think they've counted now 13 uh, white and indigenous congregations gathering there. I don't know that they'll have 1,000 people, but they think they will at Essex. There are a couple other indigenous congregations that are hosting a cluster. Raymond Flett in Winnipeg, a United Church congregation that meets indigenous, that meets in the chapel of the great Knox Church, is going to be co-hosting with Knox a big cluster for the city of Winnipeg. And that's a service in which the minister at the Raymond Flett will be uh, smudging the offering, and so on. So we're getting dimensions of the United Church
Yeah, yeah.
in these things. And John Bedell, I want to tell you, that's one of the ones that we're going to be excerpting for the telecast on the June 10th, in which right across Canada there will be 20 clusters, not congregations, but clusters, contributing to a televised special,
Yeah.
and Raymond Flett will be involved in that one.
So why don't we talk to John a little bit about that? Because these celebrations are taking place throughout the spring and into the summer, not necessarily all in that same weekend. A lot of them will be, but John, maybe talk to us a little bit about how this is many of these things, or at least that service that Brian was just talking about, are going to be accessible to people on the web and on Vision TV.
Sure. The well, I can't give you all the specifics because we're still working on that and will be intensely over the next couple of months. However, the um, the main broadcast will be on Vision TV on the 10th of June. Following that, for people that weren't able to watch it live, it will be on YouTube in its entirety as well. So that will follow sometime later for those that can't watch it. So it can be viewed both live on Vision TV or later on in much the same format. Um, as far as the how this is being put together, it's an almost perfect example of a uniquely Canadian approach, um, based on the vastness of this country, uh, because we're recording services all the way across the country. Um, we will be working to try and um, get a uniform format that will look fairly seamless when we stitch it all together, but we'll be stitching together services from literally across this huge country, um, and bringing it into one single service, that people watch at one time. So it's it's going to be an interesting challenge for those of us that are church techies, um, which
But
is actually
but
something to look forward to. But to be honest, there's a community of church techies across Canada that
yeah.
will actually be another community that is actually coming together on this.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, all the investment that so many congregations have been making in communications technologies, a lot of it boosted by COVID, of course, but we now have that kind of capacity where someone creative like you can actually tap into that network and gather in materials in ways that we would have never been able to do in the past.
Yep. Just a few years ago, this would have been not impossible, but would have been enormously challenging.
Yeah.
But like you say, COVID sort of brought this to a head, and now everybody does it. So we can tie this together. We will be over the next month or so. I'll be hosting a couple of town halls for church techies that are going to be involved in this, so
Hmm.
that we can do this well. Because there's no point doing something like this for this church that we love if we can't do it well. So
Mhm.
we want to do it. We want this to be, well, it's 100 years. We need to. We're justifying a huge amount of effort, and we want this to be truly a celebration of that 100 years. And the fact that this is something that we've only been able to do for the last 3 or 4 of those 100 years kind of makes it special for me.
Yeah, yeah, it's very exciting, and so good on you, John. And I don't want to underestimate how much work this is going to be, in spite of the fact that we now have this capacity actually pulling together a TV appropriate and TV ready special like that. Sounds like it's going to be a big job, but great to have you on it. You said something which I think leads us to the next chunk of things that we want to talk about. This church that we love. This church that we love, I think, is what has to reside at the heart of this effort, which is ongoing from the foundation and the general council and the friends of the foundation, of trying to create legacies and endowments for the future of the church. Brian, this really is about people figuring out a way that they can support this church that we love.
Yes, I'd like to just give you just a few final illustrations of clusters, and then move into that exact thing. Uh, the there are several indigenous clusters, and we had the host of one of them on in one of our previous programs, Kimberly Roy. She's helping to host the cluster in northeastern Alberta. It's an indigenous host for settler congregations and so on. So that's a good thing. There's something very interesting happening at Bloor Street United Church, where the new headquarters of the United Church will be opened at a little cluster service uh, that'll be featured on John's program on the 10th, and so on. Uh, the service in Gander, Newfoundland, uh, is another super cluster. It's for the whole central portion of Newfoundland. Uh, and that's the congregation that played such a big role in the stage play and movie Come From Away. People from America, when 9/11, people slept on the pews in the Fraser Road United Church in Gander, and so on. So there are all those things now. Excerpts from 20 clusters across the country will be dovetailed together in the way that John has described. They will begin at St. Andrews Wesley in Vancouver for 5 minutes, and they'll be going for a couple of minutes to the Good Fish Lake congregation, and on it goes. And that's a 90-minute special that will be featured on Vision TV, but it's not to be confused with the June 8th national service. Ours is a congregational thing moving along, but the national church is doing a live streamed service on the 8th of January, of June. So there will be all these cluster services, some on the last Sunday of May, some on the first Sunday of June, and John will be recording parts of some of them. And then the National Church is doing a big service with a lot of superstars and some international figures joining, and that's on the 8th. And then there's this congregational weaving together on the actual anniversary date, June 10th, and so on. And at that time, there will be an offering. Well, the offering will take place in many of the other congregations before that, but it has to do with the legacies and the congregational endowments that you were starting to mention there. Most people don't realize that plate offerings as support for the church is a relatively new phenomenon. Churches and congregations have been financed in a dozen different ways prior to the plate offering. But the first plate offerings happened in baskets 248 years ago in Europe. And from about 250 years ago on, they developed into, in North America, it happened 200 years ago, beginning in New York and spread throughout the whole area, including St. James in Montreal, which was the first to have plate offerings, and so on. But plate offerings are a relatively new phenomenon. In one of my books, we described some of the early churches that are mentioned in the New Testament that endowed themselves. The church in Samos in Turkey now bought a ship. Most of their members in the early church were Jewish merchants in that town, and they bought a ship. It's owned by the church, and to this day, that congregation owns a ship, and that's what makes the money. Now there are other ways that congregations get money. They rent their gym to the daycare during the week. There's a big church that I've had something to do with in Detroit that has the main parking lot for the football team, what's it called? The Lions, the Detroit Lions. And all the Lions games fill that parking lot, and it makes half the income for that church. But the most common thing is a congregational endowment. In English, they call it a living. And these little rural churches that have been there 1,000 years will never close because they were in better times endowed with what's called a living, that pays the minister's salary and provides the vicarage, and so on. The congregation still takes up an offering, but it's just to keep the building open, pay the utilities and its outreach and its activities, its ministries, and so on. But most of the rural churches in England have a living, uh, for example. And there are other things. The best other example of a second stream of income is in Germany, where all people who profess to belong to a church pay a special tax,
Hmm.
and the government collects the money and distributes a grant to every congregation in the recognized denominations.
Right. But that's not likely to happen in Canada.
No, that's not going to happen in Canada. But you've got congregations like the one that I attend that now has a $10 million endowment, and the endowment contributes about 80% of the annual budget. And that congregation now has two ministers, even though it's a tiny congregation, one who does outreach only and has a center for indigent and needy people and all that kind of stuff. The best example of all is St. Andrew's Wesley in Vancouver, that has an endowment of $160 million and a multi-million dollar budget and all that kind of stuff. Now, we may be starting small in some congregations, but the United Church Foundation is promoting a legacy fund during the anniversary in which people can give to all kinds of United Church institutions, the seminaries or the summer camps or the different things. They should all have a little endowment to give them stability through challenging times. But the Friends of the Foundation that I happen to chair is working very hard to begin a program in which every congregation should have not just a memorial fund, but should have an endowment and should run it through the United Church Foundation.
Right. And there's lots of information available to people who are interested in that, available from the foundation, but also it sounds to me like from the Friends of the Foundation. But in the limited amount of time we have left to us, Brian, um, some congregations, thanks to the generosity of members or intelligent investment or whatever, do have the kind of endowments that you've mentioned, and that allows them to do things that would not be possible otherwise.
Yeah.
But also, don't we have to sort of address, in a sense, the elephant in the room, which is this is the wealthiest generation in the history of the
Yes.
country, arguably of the world. I mean, you
Yes.
see, I mean, there was an article, there was a report on CBC just the other day that something like a couple of $1 trillion worth
Yes.
of legacy is about to move from one generation to the next.
Yes.
And I don't think people understand how, with intelligent use of the tax system and other things, they can make very substantial contributions either to their local congregation or to the community of faith they want to support or to the national church in ways that no previous generation could do. It's not just the super rich who now can afford to endow a church. It's now an awful lot of just ordinary folks who suddenly
Yep.
find themselves with an astonishing amount of money as
Yep.
they get into their later years.
There's a number of things that can be said in that regard. A minister from northern Saskatchewan emailed me to say, we don't know that we can do this because this is a congregation that doesn't have a very large budget at present, and we would like to have a second stream of income. But can you imagine us taking up an offering, asking people to endow the church? We haven't got any likelihood of that happening. And so we're asking for $100 from every family to set up their endowment to get started. Fine. But I said to her, be sure that you're running your program when the people in your congregation who have money get back from Florida. She said, oh, we're a tiny rural congregation, but you're right. We've got two families that go to Florida every year. And I said to her, and she said to me, as I think about it, she said this, I bet there's not a United Church in Canada that doesn't have at least one millionaire in the congregation.
Oh, Like,
So,
I mean, this is all real estate driven, right?
well,
Um,
much of it is, but what I want to say to you is that United Church people, like in her congregation, already give endowment during their lifetime and also in their wills to their university, to their hospital, to the local. In Fort Erie, near where I live, the local hockey rink has an endowment. And the family who finally endowed our congregation had given consideration to adding to the endowment of the hockey rink, but decided after the appeal had been made that the church is as worthy as the university, the hospital, or the hockey rink.
And I think this is where we get back to John's statement earlier. This is about a church that you love, and
Yes.
you can demonstrate that love. You can create a legacy. You can be part, arguably, of the future life of that congregation forever by thinking about how you can use some of your wealth, not all of your wealth. We're not saying you're not going to pass on a substantial amount to your children or to other things that are important to you, but
Tithe in your will.
but
Tithe in your will.
exactly. Do you love the United Church? If so, think about how you can support it into the future.
Well, the Friends of the Foundation are pushing two goals to revive and make strong this inclination toward clusters, get the cluster thing going during the anniversary and see if that's not something that goes forward from there with a little more, not replacing presbytery, not having meetings, not passing motions, but doing things together to feel each other's strength. So we're promoting that during the anniversary, and we're also promoting the idea during the cluster services that there should be an endowment in each congregation. All right.
Sounds great. Listen, gentlemen, I think that's a good place for us to end this. And it's been such a pleasure working with you for these last several weeks. Thank you, Brian, for conceiving this and producing this and finding great people to talk to, and John for making sure that this, is presentable later in the day after we've recorded. As I say, it's just been a pure pleasure working with you both.
John,
Thanks, Ron.
tell me what you said about Royal before. We're so fortunate to have him.
Yep, this is one of the most fun parts of this whole thing has been watching you work, Royal.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's just like I love the United Church. It's easy to do this for the United Church, and especially easy to do this when I've got the kind of engaged support I get from both you and Brian. So thank you both.